Kargil, August 1999, 10,800 feet above the sea level, bone-chilling, minus 10 degrees Celsius. A young captain from the Indian Army, a Gorkha soldier, was in midst of a battlefield soaked in blood, suffering and chaos of war. The temperature was freezing, but this soldier was drenched in sweat. The gunfire had stopped. The Gorkhas had raided an enemy bunker. The shouting, the chaos, it had all faded with the war cries of Ayo Gorkhali, Jai Mahakali. It was no longer a battle of guns, but one of brute strength, hand-to-hand combat. No rifles, no distance, no cover, just one man against another, and often against more. On the scenes was my friend and an enemy soldier. They scuffled on snow-covered rocks of Kargil, close enough to hear each other's breathing. My friend had him. His kukri was against the enemy's throat, his knees pinning him down. The scuffle had ended, but nearly. The enemy, weak, barely gripping my friend's wrist, was ready for the final strike. He knew what was coming, and then my friend committed a blunder. The one moment of hesitation would haunt my friend for the rest of his life, and that hesitation is the reason I know this story, my friends. Is the reason I am here to tell you today. This podcast is for every soldier who's ever been in active combat, for those who never returned, and for those who did, but left a part of themselves behind. This podcast is also for every civilian who calls for war, for revenge, for teaching the enemy a lesson, without knowing what it truly means to get into a battle, to take a life, to live with the weight of that decision forever. This podcast is for you, my fellow civilians, the war story podcasters and mainstream media, for you to come out of your desires to glorify bloody combat as if it is a bloody Bollywood film. This is for you to know about the price our soldiers pay for realizing your desires. Lately, I've seen a trend of black cats, Marcos, paras and special forces guests being paraded and invited in the podcast. They sit there, cameras rolling, mics in front of them, and they're prompted to talk about the actions and kills. I feel sad watching this insensitive glorification of war and death, all in name of inspiring the younger generation. I feel sad these specialists narrating their missions like a scripted action-packed movie. They talk about gunfights, hand-to-hand combats, how many enemies they took down, how cold-blooded and fearless they were in face of the enemy. These specialists, they flaunt their tattoos and war trophies, all for capitalist consumption, feeding an audience thirsty for war stories, for tales of merciless killings, and for the projection of masculinity. And ironically, the audience, they eat it up like a Bollywood masala film. The comments flood in. Wow, sir, what bravery. Tell us more of your stories. Tell us more about your combat. What a legend you are, sir. What a role model you are, sir. But let me ask you this. How many real warriors, the one who have truly seen bloodshed, ever come forward and talk about it like this? The real Indian Army men do not talk like mercenaries. The real men of the Indian Army talk and behave like humans for whom being in combat was not their first choice, but a compulsion to protect honor and safety of people like you and me. The kind of war stories being paraded on podcasts today are not meant to inspire the younger generation to join the forces out of honor and duty. They are being sold as entertainment, glorifying war as a spectacle, rather than exposing the brutal, soul-scarring reality that war truly is. War isn't a podcast story. It isn't a highlight reel. It isn't a scripted monologue for clicks and views. Real war doesn't come with background music. Real war isn't a montage of dramatic moments. The only soundtrack in real war is the thunder of artillery, the crack of rifles firing 500 rounds per minute and multiple rifles firing at the same time, the roar of fighter jets flying past at low altitudes, the scream of soldiers wounded in battle crying for help, in pain, and the men who have truly seen it, the men who have walked through the fire and killed with their bare hands, watching their brothers die beside them and spent hours in the same trench where the buddy was killed. They don't talk. They don't sit in a studio sipping coffee, clinking glasses, bragging about their kills. The real men, they sit in silence. They wake up at night haunted. They drink in private, and when it gets too much, they break in solitude. And when they do talk about it, and when they finally let it out, they don't boast. They cry. I know this because I've seen it with my own eyes. I'm not making up a story to add drama or shock value. This episode is a real narration. This really happened in August of 1999 at Kargil. And for those who think war is just about strategy, tactics and heroism, let me tell you, war is also about hesitation, regret, and the kind of memories that haunt a man for the rest of his life. It was late. We were sitting together drinking since 6 p.m. one evening. All through his face was calm, cracking jokes, remembering our childhood pranks. The same disposition my friend has always carried when he used to jump terrace to watch a movie. I was 7 and he was 11 at that time. The same happy-go-lucky guy image that he had always maintained. I often used to ask him all through the years about his combats, but all through the years he had never spoken about his combats. He always said, that's one story that you should never know unless you develop the right mindset, which needs the right training. And let us not talk about something that you are not trained to digest. And I respected his opinion. So, he never told his war stories. He never tried to prove anything. He just lived his life like any other man. Except he wasn't like any other man. Deep down, I always knew that he'd seen death. He had taken lives. He had survived what most of us wouldn't. But he never talked about it. But that night, after drinking together for more than 9 hours, something changed. Somewhere after we had polished a bottle of Hercules rum between us and we were polishing our 4th beer, I noticed his hands began to tremble. And then to my shock, this man, this feared Gorkha, began to cry. Not just tears, he sobbed like a child. I asked him, why are you crying? And through his tears he said, I still remember the guy. I asked, which guy? He took a deep breath and whispered, the one I killed. Then with a stern yet tearful face, he went on to say, I have killed many people in my life. As special forces, we barge into places, we fire, we execute missions. But we don't know who we have killed. I'd been and still involved in counterinsurgency operations across India. I have taken part in direct action missions, interrogated, captured terrorists and led operations against armed militants. I was on the ground during one of India's secretive surgical strikes where I went behind the enemy lines and killed. But that night, the night of August 99, in Kargil was different. This was the first time I got to know who I killed. This time it was no faceless enemy, just the two of us, locked in a battle for survival. And one of us only would walk alive. I had him. My kukri was against his throat. My knees nailing him down after a scuffle. Just one move and it would be all over. But then I committed a blunder. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of a man I was about to kill. Because what I saw was not eyes of a Pakistani soldier. Those eyes were not of a man who was fighting for his country anymore. Those eyes were not of the eyes of an enemy, not the eyes of a terrorist. Those eyes were the eyes of a man just like me. Those were eyes of a man who knew he was about to die. And when I was killing him, and I was still looking at his eyes, I was nailing him down with my knees. Within a few seconds, I saw everything in his eyes. The fear, the regret, the silent plea for mercy. I saw a man thinking about his family, his home, his life. I saw him accepting his fate. And yet, there was defiance. For a moment, I hesitated because I felt human, but then my training took over and I had a mission to accomplish. So I did what I was trained to do. It was me, my hands, my kukri, and I killed him. After it was over, I searched his body, a routine check, but what I found shook me. What I found was a photograph, a young woman smiling beside him, on the back written in delicate handwriting. On a marriage, 15 June 1999, मैं आपका इंतजार करूंगी. And the date was just 2 months ago when I was killing this man. That night I did not sleep. That night I did not feel victorious. That night I did not feel like a soldier who had won. That night I felt a human. I want to take a moment to give credits to the Indian Army, not just for creating some of the toughest soldiers in the world, but for something much greater. Indian Army doesn't just make world's best and most feared killing machines. The Indian Army makes soldiers with a heart and ethics. Even after going through so much bloodshed, so much slaughter, the Indian Army still builds soldiers who hold on to their compassion, who still have feelings, and I'm proud to say that our soldiers still cry after winning. They still cry after killing. Whoever says "Mard ko dard nahi hota" means real men don't feel pain, has never seen an Indian soldier. The Indian Army has created warriors who do feel pain, but the pain stays in their hearts. It doesn't get broadcasted on a broadcast. That is the strength of Indian Army, my friends, and that is why our soldiers are the best of the best. Our soldiers are not just killing machines, they are human first. Once again, this episode is not for just those who died, it is for those who lived. And we remember you, we cherish you, we are proud of you, we respect you, and we are lucky to have you on our side. Please drop a comment about what you think about this podcast. Your inputs are valuable, and please like and share so that the message reaches more and more people. Jai Hind.